Hi, I'm John Pasalis, housing analyst and founding broker at Realosophy Realty, where I lead our team of agents in providing data-driven real estate advice to home buyers and home sellers throughout Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area. We launched this Toronto Real Estate Summit because we're getting a lot of questions from consumers about the volatility in our economy and our housing market that was brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're going to be talking to leading economists, housing industry leaders, personal finance experts, and real estate agents to get a better understanding of what's going on in our markets today and what are some of the key things that we should be looking for in the months ahead so you can all make smarter real estate decisions. If you have more specific questions about your home buying and selling needs, please feel free to email me anytime at askjohn@movesmartly.com, and I hope you enjoy this interview.
Hi, I'm Murmi Desai, Head of Content at Realosophy and Move Smartly Editor. My next guest is Andrea DelZotto of Tridel. Tridel is one of Canada's largest condo developers, and they currently have 20 projects underway in the Greater Toronto Area. I'm curious to hear from Andrea firsthand what it's like to manage that much complexity in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic. Hi, Andrea. Great to have you join us.
Thanks. Nice to be here, Murmi.
So let's ask a basic question. What does a typical week have you doing as head of Tridel's people, community, and culture?
Thanks for asking. It seems that there's nothing typical really these days, but working remotely and having my 3 children learn from home. So nothing's been really typical, but I will give you a bit of a glimpse to the best that I can. So the people and culture aspect is really one part of where I spent a lot of time and effort setting things up internally about 3 years ago. And right now I'm the executive sponsor of that group. So that has really taken off on its own. We have a great team in place because we really realized that we are in a war for talent in many, many ways. So how could we really better attract and retain the talent that we need to be a best place to work? So that was really the philosophy behind that, and it's gone really, really well, as I said. The other area where I spend a lot of time recently is as an executive sponsor of our innovation group, and that is, we typically would think of building innovation as the type of innovation that we focus on, but now there's so many different areas and opportunities because of the world we live in. And so we really take a bit of a broader lens and we look at it in our systems and our processes. There's a lot of opportunities to pilot initiatives, to partner with people and collaborate. So that's a new role, and it's an exciting role, looking at new ways of doing old things, as I love to say. And then my other real area of focus is it's about my 3rd year on the board as a director of the Tridel Group of Companies. So that is really an interesting journey. It's a hybrid of the owners, which includes my father and other family members, and then I am the first of the next generation to be on that board. So it's a great learning opportunity. I feel very privileged to be part of it, and it takes up a lot of time because we're going through a lot of succession. We are implementing new governance, so it takes a lot of time and energy, but it also is really rewarding to see us evolving.
Awesome. And now you're managing through a pandemic as well.
Yeah, nothing stays the same. So that's all right. We're up for it.
So how did that feel? After a strong start to the condo market earlier this year, in mid-March, COVID suddenly hits, bringing everything to a standstill. What are your immediate thoughts?
I'd like to say that our immediate thought was not really panic, because we tend to not be able to have the luxury of knee-jerk reactions because our project timelines and what we do in real estate are really always such long-term initiatives. So if you think of when we acquire a piece of property and then we deliver homes to people, that would typically be 7 years. And, with larger, more complex projects, even longer. So we don't tend to focus on short term. We do, use hindsight in order to look forward, and we see that these crises and these types of situations, they're not permanent. Everything passes, and it's just a matter of time. So we knew that we would get through it, and we just have to be positive. And I know there was a lot of hardship and a lot of heartache, but the market was a bit frozen, I guess the economists would say. So there wasn't really any activity in terms of listings or sellings, but we just have to be patient. And of course, when you're making large, significant purchases such as homes, that's going to be affected because your consumer confidence has just really plummeted. You don't know about your employment security. You don't know really about your investment portfolio, perhaps. And you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring in terms of paying rent, paying mortgages. So it's understandable that things slowed down to the pace that they did, for sure.
And what was the immediate impact on Tridel's building sites? I believe there's 20 projects currently underway in the GTA.
Yes, probably more with our construction management and Tridel, usually around 30 at one time. So yeah, I would describe it as a bit of a mixed fortune, right? Because you have this responsibility and pride in keeping the economy going to some extent, but then you also have the risk and the fear and wanting to protect the health and well-being of your employees. So we were deemed essential, as you know. We did not have the luxury of taking a pause, and really we just had to heighten all of our safety protocol on the go, on the fly. And I think, our head of construction would say that took about a month to really evolve it and see the reduction and the impact to our productivity. And we went from having probably monthly site meetings to daily site meetings, whether they were in person or whether they were virtual, but it was all hands on deck and took about a month to iron out a really heightened system of making people feel that they have a safe place to work.
So what does that look like on a site? How do you socially distance on a construction site?
So yeah, there's a lot of questions about that for sure. We, human beings, we're creatures of habit, but that doesn't mean that things can't be possible to learn new ways. And it is possible in a lot of circumstances, and there were a lot of measures put in place. But let's face it, there are some tasks in which it's not possible. So the masks, the restrictions to site entry, the reduced number of people on site. There was all new protocol to abide by the new standards that were expected of us, and it just there was definitely an impact. I would say we evolved in many regards, but if I think of little things such as the hoist, for example, right? That was really restricted to 4 people in a hoist. And we did things such as increase the timing of our elevators, because the more vertical transportation we could have, the better we were equipped. So we also extended hours. So there were deliveries of kitchens and appliances during evenings and weekends. And of course, scheduling trades, so they were staggered. So you would have electricians, and then you would have plumbing. And so everything was staged to the best that we could to mitigate that interaction, that one-on-one kind of contact with people.
So all of this entails a lot of work, and a recent CIBC report estimated that these new rules, this new way of working, could impact the productivity on sites up to 40%, see a reduction in productivity. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say again, after much discussion, that's accurate. At the very beginning, it was definitely 40, even perhaps to 50% impact on our productivity. And I would say within a month after, where I mentioned we had sorted out some new systems and procedures, about a month we went to 60 to 70% efficiency. And now I'm very grateful to say we're at 90% efficiency. So, it was a big hurdle. And I would say the biggest challenge was really people's mindset and having them feel confident coming back to the job site, knowing that we're mitigating risk, we're making it as safe as possible. And there was also a lot of family pressure. I mean, you can imagine you have your loved ones pleading with you not to maybe go to work, and you've been deemed essential. So a lot of being pulled in different directions. And, I think we did the best we could, and I couldn't be prouder of our team, really.
So your outlook is a little bit maybe more optimistic than I believe the CIBC report was seeing that lost productivity lasting a bit longer. Your sense?
We're very fortunate, very, very fortunate that I think we have very tenured employees, very long-lasting relationships with our trades and suppliers, and I think everybody really coming on board and working together was what helped us accelerate that loss to productivity.
And yet a lot of these new measures will take time and introduce cost to the process. So do you see it potentially increasing adding to the price of condos?
We certainly hope not, because in a market that's facing so many challenges, right? It's difficult. You don't want to pass on anything else to the home buyer if we don't have to, obviously. There was something I came across. The Ontario Construction Secretariat estimated about a 28% increase to job sites for PPE and those new health and safety protocol measures. We certainly think that's a little bit on the generous side. We don't think it's going to be quite as substantial as that, fortunately.
In terms of a lost productivity?
In terms of the costs also being passed on to the homeowners, we think we can manage that in a very I guess, to the least disruption at all, because this market is there's so much pressure that the home buyers can't incur any more costs than they already have that we're passing on.
And yet the kind of personal protection equipment, the PPE that people are using on job sites, would you describe that as more advanced, sophisticated than what, the masks we're all wearing, obviously?
We did a lot of testing and research and, studying of it, and we are, maybe our standard would be a little more sophisticated, but to me it's our standard. So we had a lot of research go into it. We happen to have one of our companies that is in the seniors residence, right? So we had a lot of expertise in that area helping us select the PPE on site, which has been, really, really quite outstanding.
So adjusting to all of this, do you think there's a risk we'll see condo projects being delayed or canceled in the coming 12 months? And maybe this might look different across the industry. For example, there's small, medium, and larger builders. Obviously, Tridel is one of the largest.
Sure. We always say we're in such a high-risk industry, and we're a very conservative company. So we've, as I mentioned, such tenured employees and teams, and we have really constantly challenged each other in terms of scheduling, in terms of costs, in terms of revenue assumptions, always to mitigate those risks. And we do that to the best of our ability. That being said, if the velocity of sales declines, you're going to have a slowdown in the starts of construction for sure. And again, back to that consumer confidence, people's behaviors are not going to be the norm until we get that increase in consumer confidence and they feel more secure making those significant purchases. When we look back, I said we look back to certain situations. You look at SARS, you look at 9/11. SARS, for example, in 2003, they said for the normal activity to resume was about 4 months. So it sounds too brief to me, but we are hopeful that it's months that we start seeing things pick up and not years. And anecdotally, we're starting to hear that there is some improvement in consumer confidence. Just takes time.
And that, I think, adding to some consumer concerns is that at the end of March, we saw a relatively big builder, Cresford, which has 3 downtown Toronto projects under construction, go into receivership. So do you think something like that is reflective of the broader pressure that some firms might come under because of COVID, or do you think that's something else? We tried, as not to comment too much on other developers and their hardships, but we do know, in fact, that failure was not a result of COVID. That was a result of some other financial difficulties. So, and I think it's just maybe I mentioned the risks, and yet we are paying exorbitant amounts of money for land, and you just have to really, really know how to manage those risks because they're significant. They can't be underestimated. So a lot of experience has helped us navigate these waters, 8 decades, and I'm sure the learning's nowhere near done. We're continuing. So there's a lot of curiosity about just who is buying condos in the Toronto area, even pre-COVID, whether they're end users who plan on living in the units themselves, whether they're domestic investors, whether there's foreign investors who plan to rent out the units or just hold them for appreciation. So do you have a good sense of who Tridel's top consumer groups are and what the rough split amongst them might be?
We do to some extent, of course. We have we study our data and want to have those insights as to who our purchasers are and home buyers. So everybody wants that answer what is the percentage that is investors? And I think if we looked at Urbanation, for example, I was discussing this recently with our EVP of Sales and Marketing, they would estimate about 1/3 is the investors of the new condominium purchasers. And really that's looking, I believe, at the MLS transactions, new condominiums over the past year. We would actually say that's probably a little bit conservative. There's probably a more substantial amount of home buyers that are investors. And really some people would say they form maybe 50% of the rental pool across the portfolio. And you can understand why. I think 77% of the rental supply was built before 1980. So fortunately, we're seeing more of that because it is a little bit tired. So that's a positive. But the condominium market that we study is not one market, right? It's several sub-markets in it. So you may have a very tall, small size suite condominium downtown Toronto, and that would for sure have a significant amount of investors, up to 80%. And then you would have probably a 10 to 12 story condominium a little further north, for example, that would have very, very low amounts of investors and very high end users. So it varies across, and each community is representative of the neighborhood it's in. That being said, our average size is 900 square feet. And there's a lot smaller than that is very appealing to investors. So we don't really cater to that market. We cater to more than one because I think that also helps us manage our risk, obviously, but we like to have varying price points and sizes available for new homes. I would tell you, I could give you some stats. That average age of our consumer is 42 years old, which is kind of interesting. But when you correlate that to the average age of the Canadian worker, that's also 42 years old. The average age of our first-time home buyer is about 32 years old, and that's not a significant amount of our home buyer because with the financial, responsibilities, 20% down deposit, we don't tend to get a lot of first-time home buyers. What we see is the investors that purchase, they will often sell that home in resale to a first-time buyer. So, what else can I tell you? Outside of Canada, we estimate about 5 to 6% of our home buyers, number one being US, number two being China. Obviously, these numbers are going to change. And I think that also the first-time buyer comment, I mentioned the average size, about 900 square feet, and the average price is about $1 million. So it's understandable why that's not really within reach of the first-time home buyers.
Right. So mix of projects, when you're planning for them, is it something that you think about in advance for each neighborhood that you're in, or is it a mix that you're achieving over a portfolio? So a certain mix of buildings that might be geared towards investors, a certain percentage geared towards end users?
I think really that depends on the surrounding neighborhood. Like I said, it's reflective. The condominium community, the suite composition, that will all be reflective of the demographic, for example. So I know if we look at our waterfront community, there's a very high end user that is coming from actually all regions of Toronto, and they're coming from $6 million homes and buying $3 million condos. So it's always learning. It's always different, and I think, but it is intentional that the composition is so varied. It has to be, right?
Yes, it actually is very interesting. I have a great question from Manish, a summit attendee, who asks whether the anticipated trend of more downtown employees working from home will cause an exodus from urban centers that may affect the condo market. I'll also add here that the value of having more space in a backyard has shot up in many of our minds during this lockdown. But it must be hard in planning a new project. How do you assess whether buyer habits are changing over the long term or whether this is a short term trend? It seems, given what you're saying about 7-year timelines, it must be hard to react to consumer changes and preferences.
It's hard to react as much as you want to predict. I think given even the uncertainty of COVID, the normal predictions we would do are thrown outside the window. But I think we look at some really foundational insights that are probably just enough ahead of their time that we can act accordingly. I would say our real focus on we say people, planet, profit, corporate social responsibility. You look at people that are, like I said, 34 is the average age. If we're looking at 24-year-olds, we see certain foundational, I guess, aspects of their life that they're looking to the organizations that they're making their purchasing decisions from, and having to respond to those. So those are, I think, some of the behavioral things we can start to study early, because that consumer is not quite ripe for purchasing a condominium, but perhaps in 10 years. And we know, by knowing who they are at the core, some of those things stay strong, right? So you can react to that. In terms of the workplace and our shift to remote, we laugh because we say, I don't think there's many people after 4 months that aren't kind of looking forward to going back to work, right? I'm sure there's a percentage that are quite happy working with that flexibility, but I don't think it's an all or nothing, right? It's going to be a hybrid, I predict. So I think we're going to talk about the well later, but we have 1.2 million square feet of office space, and it's already 84% pre-leased. So those people, they are coming back to work, and I think they'll be quite happy to do so.
So let's talk about the well, which is under construction at the old Globe and Mail site. And it's a big live-work retail complex. So if there is a more permanent shift to some percentage of the population working from home, how do you think that would impact a project like this?
You know what? Again, back to long term, it is so far out. We are not delivering those homes until 2023. A lot's going to change by then. We never know exactly. We don't have that. We're truth tellers, not fortune tellers. But we would assume that everybody, there's going to be, like I said, that hybrid. There's going to be definitely an interest in people going back to work, away from the work remotely trend. And I think when you have, we're I think called the mixed use capital of the world right now. We have so many mixed use projects here. And I think the beauty of them is that all those different components, the retail, the residential, the office, they all feed one another, right? The retail is feeding the office is feeding the retail. And it's a great synergy that I think people are going to appreciate even more. There's so much talk now about even these 20-minute cities that are in Paris. When you live in a community like that, you essentially have everything you want, but also the variety of environment and scenery to make it not feel so dull and not feel like Groundhog Day every day, like we've all been feeling. So I think there's definitely going to be an appeal and attraction that is sustainable about that work, live, play environment. And I may be optimistic, but I think you have to be.
So are there any other features that you think may be under reconsideration, maybe that were falling out of favor? I read in the New York Times that in some condo projects, the idea of a foyer where you could, I guess, in some cases, take clothes off, do your whole decontamination routine, come in, might be consideration. Another one I've read about is balcony space, maybe becoming more popular.
Sure. I think balconies have been the hot topic lately, for sure. And I think in a lot of, it's very expensive to build balconies, but would people be willing to pay more for that outdoor space? Because it has been life-saving over the past 4 months for several people who are living in high rise. That being said, we also are able to incorporate that outdoor aspect to a smaller space living lifestyle by having outdoor spaces seamlessly integrated in the community. We have, green rooftops. We have so urban agriculture. We have I think one building we have 2 rooftops that are green and have farming. So they don't necessarily have to come in the shape and form of a balcony. We can be more creative about it. And I think if we do that, sometimes in those shared spaces, you can accomplish even more than that. You can also accomplish creating that community engagement, which is another plus. And I think, if anything, we can understand and appreciate more over the past 4 months that urban dense feeling of isolation that really, unfortunately, comes with it a lot of the time. And I think people are realizing how critical that engagement piece is.
And on that topic of sort of everybody living in these tall communities, maybe not necessarily all knowing each other, I'm wondering how much the rise of the short-term rental, the Airbnb style rental, is considered when it comes to condo projects and planning. Obviously, you're designing at the beginning, so you're not necessarily, thinking about people buying them and eventually turning them into short-term rentals. But obviously, those give rise to a certain kind of community. Does that come into consideration at all at the planning or thinking on?
It does. It is the reality, and as much as people want to believe it's not happening in their communities, right, with some signage or bylaws, it is in fact happening. We know that the data is out there, but we are a homeowner first, mentality. So we don't. I would say, other than trying to mitigate any risk that comes from having those short-term tenants, we don't really think about it, openly into our design, because it's not something that the condo corporations tend to like, and it's not something that the residents seem to like. If you imagine, if you purchase a home and you want your neighbor to be your neighbor, not a hotel guest. Mm-hmm. That being said, I don't think short-term rentals is going away. I just don't think it's been done properly with the transparency and with the security. I do think the legislation is going to help. It's going to prevent inventory from taken out of the market. And I think that's critical. But home sharing is not necessarily a bad thing. We've just gone about it in a bad way. So lots of room for improvement. And, again, not black and white. So I hope we can reach a happy place with that, because I don't think home sharing is going away. And especially in a city as expensive as ours.
Yes, I was actually wondering whether any research into sound and other things has arisen because of some of these tensions, where you don't know if your neighbor tomorrow could end up being a short-term.
Right. So research into sound, did you say? Like acoustic?
Yeah, so some of those issues that can arise from that fear of having that turnover.
I mean, we definitely consider acoustics. We always try to go above and beyond. We've had, comical stories about high heels on the floor above you or ballet dancers. So acoustics are always top of mind when you're in a shared space like that. And but sometimes when you have people living in a shared space that you feel aren't as emotionally invested, and it's not, they're not as caring as you would hope for them to be. But I think there's a big difference between a 30-day guest and a one-night guest. And I think there's a lot to do with the screening and some of the security that you can implement in terms of knowing who's in your building and making sure that it's safe, because that's number one. I think everybody now is in the business of health and safety, whether it's COVID, whether it's strangers in your building, who we're in contact with, really.
You mentioned the short-term rental demand is down right now. Obviously, there's a lot less tourism, but is your anticipation that these longer-term trends will return to normal?
The short-term rental is down. I think what's happening is people are starting to, they're either going to go about transitioning that asset. They're either going to do long-term traditional rentals, or they're going to resell it into the market. So I think it's going to increase the rental supply and possibly even the inventory deficit that we have. So I think that's going to be a plus. I see Airbnb, I watch them closely, and I think they are even pivoting to 30 days or longer. They're pivoting to local tourism. I think it's going to change. I think it's definitely going to change away from that 3-night stay. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have another great panel that will be looking at that in even more depth. So even prior to COVID, rents in condos did start to come down at the start of the year. And that was after a prolonged rise. So a lot of rent appreciation, which of course is attractive to the investors that you were mentioning earlier. I wonder what a leveling off, let's say rents arrive at a floor, which is what Urbanation and other experts are predicting. What will that do to investor interest, do you think? Because there's obviously been a lot of excitement about the idea of the incredible ever-rising rent.
Right. I was going to say, Urbanation is really the expert in that space. So for me, but if I had to comment, I'm looking back on Q1 this year, there were about 7,000 condominiums that were delivered to the market. I think also, like I said, you're going to have that, contribution of some of the short-term supply that's being handed over to a longer purpose. And really, I don't know. I think, as I mentioned before, I'd be hesitant to make a prediction because I think anything that we would have predicted normally is at the window with the uncertainties that lie ahead with COVID. But I think I would trust Urbanation to say that probably leveling off would be realistic.
And so one of your latest projects, you mentioned it, your projects on the water. So Aqualuna is one right on the water south of the Esplanade neighborhood. It seems to be geared towards a different type of buyer.
Yes.
It's definitely not a small 500 square foot
Right.
What is the vision behind this project? Can you take us through the conception and why such a project was envisioned?
Yeah, that was very intentional. Again, I had some conversations with our sales and marketing, and it was extremely intentional not to compete with that 500 square foot, highly appealing investment condo along the waterfront in particular, and in downtown Toronto. And the average size there is 1,400 square feet. Quite, like I said, intentionally by design. It is the fourth and final building in that waterfront community of ours with Hines. And that is what was interesting to learn about that was each subsequent community, the average square footage got bigger because we noticed there was a real demand for it. And as I said earlier, typically you see a lot of the potential home buyers come from a surrounding area. You know, there's certain distance from where you're going to develop, but with the waterfront, we noticed that the buyers were coming from everywhere. And like I said, selling $6 million homes, buying $3 million condos, and it's not something that can happen everywhere, but on the waterfront, there's definitely a market for that, we discovered, and thus the increasing size as we went through each community. But it's not surprising when you think of our demographic, right? When you think of our aging population and people, empty nesters, we don't call it upsizing. I think we call it right sizing. So so they can have a beautiful home with a little less maintenance and square footage than they might have, but in a beautiful setting. I mean, it's stunning. So
Would you describe that as one of the first projects that maybe has that profile, very higher end not downsizer, right sizer?
No, we have a few of them. We have a few of them, and we're about to have another. So it's quite challenging, I would say, quite exciting because every home, when you get to that level, every home is customized with people's selections and finishes. But when you get to that level and that size, there's definitely a lot more details to think through because it's not standing on its own. It's a shared space. So it's quite a successful feeling when we deliver a building like that with truly, I think what people consider mansions in the sky. So,
yes.
But I think there's more and more of them sprouting, especially with our demographic, as I said.
And even more longer term, what are some of the other long-term issues that you think maybe we might not realize that you're thinking about already? You did mention the younger buyer perhaps being interested in certain types of social involvements with their community. How can condo building be a part of that? How are you thinking about that?
I think there's a lot of underutilization in condos. I think we have, these economies of scale in terms of we have this group of people that have the potential to create real connection. And I think there's been a lack of effort in really delivering on that. So studies show, we know that the more urban and dense you live, the more lonely and isolated you are. We have more single family residences than ever. And so how do we bridge that? And I think there's probably been a bit of a shortfall with programming of these spaces. You have these beautiful spaces that maybe aren't so well lived in, and as I said, underutilized. How do we create connection within them? I think about 10 years ago, I read something about the days of handing over a building with amenities and a property manager are gone. You need to really program these spaces. So that's an area that we are really focusing on now and trying to figure out the recipe to make it work, because we know that we have to deliver on that. And I'd say it's not surprising, because as much as connectivity, I'd say, is the number one amenity we provide with I'd say Wi-Fi and good cellular coverage, it's also the connectivity face to face. I think people are appreciating that more and more, and we have to deliver on that. Another area I think where we'll be going is, again, that mixed use, but I think mixed income communities, because we have seen through this pandemic really the inequalities that exist in our communities. So a little more even distribution of those in our city, and I think it just makes for a better city altogether, better community, better city at large. So why wouldn't we do that, right? More people together, more exchange of ideas. Yeah, it's a win-win, and I think again we'll see more of that. So how do we make that happen? And we can't do it alone. We need obviously policies and a government that can help support that and help us create those types of environments.
And are there any projects that you're seeing in your research and travels that inspire you along those two lines?
There's, I mean, any of the communities where we have, before inclusionary zoning, where we have included affordable homes, whether it's through partnership with someone that we've developed land on, such as Toronto Community Housing, or whether it's with Artscape, you really see the beauty of I guess creating that kind of connection and diversity. And I mean, we live in Canada, in Toronto, where there's so much diversity, so why wouldn't we want it everywhere? And I think, especially these days, we're talking so much about equality and social equity. They're important concepts, but they're also really important to bring to fruition. So I dream of seeing more of that. But when I talk to the policies, also I think it's Portland that said if a city has more than 10,000 people, they've banned single-family zoning. So what are we going to do to make sure that we create more homes, create more affordability in our city? And it's going to take all of us, not one of us.
Yes, absolutely. So that leads us nicely to my next question. The theme of our summit is smart caution. What does that mean to you?
Smart caution?
Yes.
When I think of smart, I think of our smart buildings. I think of a smart city. And I think smart doesn't necessarily mean technology. I think smart means, very intelligent use of our resources. And that could be technology, but could also be Mother Nature and how we share resources. And I think of caution, that makes me think of resiliency. And, in our condominiums, we're not just building resilient rooms and spaces, but we are part of a much larger ecosystem. So when I think of caution, I think we have to be very careful. I think smart and careful are kind of two sides of the same coin, because you have to move ahead, but you have to do it cautiously and you have to do it intelligently. And it means taking some risk in an already high risk environment. But I think that philosophy and that mindset of starting small and getting some smaller wins before you move on to the big ones is okay. And we have to adopt that mindset. That's going to get us there. So smart caution.
Excellent. And one other question I'm going to sneak in here. Of all your projects, which is the one that you just wish you could have moved into? I know that you actually had a blog project where you did move your family into a condo. So actually, first, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And
sure.
I don't know.
I got so excited because I was going to tell everyone that I do make a practice of moving into some of our communities for at least a month, and I don't get them for free. Some people think I get it for free, but I have to rent it for a month. There's no short-term stays in our buildings, at least that we promote or policing that discipline. So I do rent a place, and I take my family of 5 and uproot them. So we're in a much smaller space. And I'd have to say, I think it's a great exercise, first of all, because I heard the expression once, there's no answers in the building, get out to the edges. So how do we learn how our buildings perform and how people are living in them if we really don't experience it? So whether that's through research, through people that are, or doing it yourself, which I think is my preferred way because I get hands-on, insight into how people live and what we build. And I think that allows us to improve it each time. We like to say every community is almost like a little petri dish, right? It's a little laboratory where we get to study, and we also get to manage our buildings with our management company, and they in fact spend more time with our home buyers than we do. So are we learning from that, using that insight to the best of our ability? And I'd like to think yes, but it never stays the same. We started off by talking about a typical week. So nothing's typical. The world is changing. It's certainly changed. And back to your question about if I could live in one community, I really do love the waterfront. However, I would live in the Republic, which is at Yonge and Eglinton. And I did in fact live there. But I really did experience there how your neighborhood and your community become your backyard. And that was the partnership with North Toronto School. And my kids, they were at the age where they were learning how to ride their bikes on the track at that school. And I can't think of a safer place to teach your kids how to ride their bike. And it just, I definitely cooked a lot less and dined out a lot more. And it was just, I really love that Yonge and Eglinton. I know it's very dense, but I also know it's a great lifestyle. So I would live there in a heartbeat.
And you say you write about your kids surprising you, that the things that you thought, bringing them to a much smaller space, the things that would bother them didn't. And then some of the things that did bother them, you didn't think about or anticipate. Can you recall any of those aha moments?
Yeah, toys, we just, it really helped us develop a leaner, minimalistic lifestyle. They don't need everything they have in that playroom or closet full of toys. And nature really did become their playroom. And I can't think of anything better than that, with kids spending less and less time outside, more and more time on their screens. And I think, the biggest pain point, I think, for not my kids, but the grown man was the elevator. It's, that vertical transportation, getting used to that is definitely different, and teaches you real organization skills because you make sure you've got everything you need when you walk out that door.
Yes. They still have to work on a transponder, like Star Trek style.
Yeah, exactly. But, there's more and more technology, but some of it we just have to rely on our own common sense, right? And yeah.
And so the final question we're asking all our experts: would you buy or sell a home right now?
I would not right now. It's my honest answer. I would sit tight. One of my mother's best pieces of advice was, when you don't know what to do, do nothing. So I would just sit tight a little more, because I think we have some waiting to do till we start to be able to make sense of this all.
Great. Well, this was such a pleasure, Andrea. Thank you so much for joining us at this.
Thank you. It was a pleasure speaking with you.